Hello, welcome back to our very first Protecting Our Planet Day. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for all your questions. I hope you've been enjoying the day so far. It's been fascinating. The sort of calibre of experts that we've had talking about all the areas of science that they're involved in has been brilliant. We've been exploring ice caps, we've been exploring oceans, we've been exploring forests. It is time to move on to
the Earth. But if you have anything that you would like to share, you can use the hashtag POP22 to share your thoughts, ideas, experiments that you're doing, your STEM club activities. Please join the conversation via that hashtag. So we are now entering our final of one of the ecosystems that we've been discussing today. You can see behind us, we've moved. We were in a forest a few minutes ago. Where are we now?
I'm trying to work it out.
We're in a peat bog.
We're in a peat bog. Now, I don't think people appreciate peat bogs enough.
Well, they will do after the next session.
I think so. So we've got Craig Bennett who's going to talk to us all about peat bogs and why peat bogs are so important. He's the CEO of the Wildlife Trust. Over to you, Craig. Are you there?
Hello, Dallas, and hello, Susie. Thank you very much. And welcome to Potteric Carr, just outside Doncaster in Yorkshire. This is a Yorkshire Wildlife Trust reserve, and it is Fenland peat, because this morning we're going to be celebrating all about the importance of our peat bogs and our peatlands. As Dallas and Susie were saying, you know, we've covered this morning ice and oceans and forests, and now we move on to the earth, and actually a particular type of earth, our soils, and that is peat. So let's start off with the question, what is peat? Well, it's a particular type of soil that is produced by plants, very particular types of mosses actually, growing in very wet areas. And when they die, they don't just rot away, they store up, they build up, and over time turn into that peat, that very special type of soil. And this actually means it grows. This means this soil grows over time. And it's incredibly important for storing carbon, which, as you all know, is therefore essential for tackling climate change. Did you know that although our peatlands, our peat bogs, our peatlands cover just 3% of the Earth's surface, actually they store 30% of the world's soil carbon. They are our largest terrestrial carbon store. And we are blessed here in the UK by being a country that's very, very important for our peatlands. In fact, it's been said before now that our peatlands are essentially the tropical rainforests of the UK. There's three main types of peatlands here in the UK. There's our blanket bog, which you find in sort of mountain environments. You find your lowland raised mires, which are amazing habitats, which grow in the lowlands. And because the peat grows over time, they actually form these domes of peat, this dome of soil, if you like, that grows up over many thousands of years. And you also have your fenland peats, like the one behind me here at Potteric Carr in Doncaster. And get this, you'll love this, our UK peatlands store more carbon than the forests of the UK, Germany and France combined. So actually a lot more carbon in our peatlands than even in all those trees, much as trees are wonderful as well. And they're amazingly wild places. You probably know about Venus flytraps in the tropics, and those plants that actually eat insects. They eat flies, trap flies and eat them. Well, we have our equivalent of them. We have our sundews, a type of British plant that is carnivorous, that eats insects, and that's found in our peat bogs. Amazing bird species like golden plover and curlew as well. So they're incredibly important for wildlife, incredibly important for storing water as well, and actually stopping water flooding our towns and cities, and making sure actually that we have enough drinking water, because 70%, yeah, that's right, 70% of our drinking water in the UK ultimately comes from some of our upland areas dominated by peatlands. But the problem is these peatlands that are so special, and they take 1,000 years just to grow 1 metre of peat. Sadly, a lot of them have been badly degraded here in the UK over many centuries. Often they've been dug up for use of fuel and for burning that peat, or they've been dug up to be used in horticulture and gardening, which is a real travesty, really, considering how important they are. And so the situation we have now is that only 20% of our peatlands in the UK are in good condition. And this amazing habitat that should be sucking carbon out the air and storing it and helping us tackle climate change, actually, sadly, so many of our peat bogs in such a bad condition, they're actually releasing carbon into the atmosphere, making the situation worse. So at the Wildlife Trust, we're working really hard across the country, and particularly in all those places that have peatlands, to make sure that we can improve them and restore our peat bogs, put them into a much, much better condition. Absolutely essential. And I'm delighted this morning to be joined by a colleague of mine, Beth Thomas. Beth, welcome.
Hi.
And you work for the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and for the Yorkshire Peat Partnership. Tell us a little bit more about the Yorkshire Peat Partnership.
So the Yorkshire Peat Partnership is a group of organisations that are restoring peatland across the north of Yorkshire. And so in the last 10 years, we've worked on about half, so 46,000 hectares of peatland across the north of Yorkshire.
Absolutely amazing. Just the other day, you went to go and visit Fleet Moss, one of the sites that Yorkshire Wildlife Trust is working on to restore peat bogs at Fleet Moss. And you did a little film.
Yep, we've got the film here today.
Enjoy the film.
Hello, I'm Amy and I'm a student at the University of Cumbria in Ambleside studying geography, and today I'm at this wonderful site called Fleet Moss in this wonderful weather to look at a peatland because I love peatlands, and I'm excited to meet Beth Thomas from the Yorkshire Peat Partnership.
Hi Amy,
Hello!
take care on the hill.
Let's try not to fall on
Yeah.
camera.
Before you even got on the bog.
What glorious weather we have!
Yeah, welcome to the usual Yorkshire weather on a peatland.
I know.
About right, I think, for an October day. What is it about peatlands that you like? What's brought you out here on such wonderful weather?
Well, I find them really fascinating because from what I've learnt through uni and studying in school, is that they're like such a big carbon store and they're not really like researched. So like when I've gone to friends and be like, oh yeah, peatlands, and they're like, what's a peatland?
Yeah, they are
Yeah,
an understood habitat.
They really are.
And there's not much knowledge out there about what they do for us and the carbon they can store, the water that they can store, and all the different plants and animals that live in these landscapes. I'm glad to hear that you enjoy them and you want to come and see this one.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
So what I've learnt is there's different kinds of peat bogs. And is this a blanket bog?
It is. This is a blanket bog. So all of Yorkshire's uplands are blanket bogs, and these are peatlands that are formed on the top of hills. So they've blanketed the hills, which is why they're called that. And this site, this is Fleet Moss. This is one of our most degraded sites we have in Yorkshire. It's about 166 hectares, and it's so degraded you can see it from space. All the
Wow.
bare peat. Yep.
That's pretty scary.
Yep, it is. So I think this gully will certainly show you the impact on this landscape.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can see how big it is.
Yeah, it's huge.
So this would have once been, 3-4 metres of peat that would have been above our heads here. So, and I think all of this has been lost in about the last 100 years.
Really? Wow. It's crazy to think it's just been lost.
Yeah,
Like we're stood where peat's meant to be.
yeah, it should be above our heads by a metre or
Yeah.
two, and it's just gone.
So are peatlands in a good condition a carbon sink?
Yeah, very much so. They store huge amounts of carbon. In fact, the peatlands just here in the UK store more carbon than is in all the forests in the UK, Germany and France combined.
Really?
So they're a
Wow.
really important store of carbon,
That's pretty
these
cool.
landscapes.
So we've said peat about 50,000 times so far. What is it?
Good question. Okay, let's go have a look closer at some over here. So, if you can imagine, this landscape actually wasn't here about 6,000 years ago, and then the climate changed and it got a lot wetter. And when it got wetter, it became a lot more waterlogged, like you see, and these waterlogged conditions are quite acidic. And so the peat is actually made out of plant matter. So it's not quite finished decomposing just because it was so waterlogged, decomposition can't occur. And so it's just made out of plants. So you see here, there's bits of plants in the peat, and because they haven't decomposed,
Yeah.
they're obviously full of carbon, because that's of course what plants are made of. And so the peat is pretty much just carbon and water. So
Wow.
that's all it is, and why it's so important we keep it all in the ground.
That is very cool. So you mentioned bare peat earlier. Why is it so bad?
Right, well, so when you expose all the peat to the atmosphere, because it's just made of carbon, it interacts with the oxygen in our air, and it basically decomposes and becomes carbon dioxide, which of course we all know is a greenhouse gas and adds to the global climate change, global warming. But when we cover the peat up, so when it's not bare peat, when it gets covered by the plants, then that process stops and the carbon stops being lost from this landscape. So it's really important that we cover the bare peat up. So, do you see this gully here?
Yeah.
We've got 26 kilometres of these type of drainage channels on this site.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is, isn't it? And do you see how much water's coming in it?
Yeah.
And all this used to just go straight down the catchment to the rivers below. And you can imagine how much sediment and silt it took with it.
Yeah.
And this obviously pollutes the rivers, damages them for the wildlife that live in them, but also it makes our drinking water need more cleaning and affects how much flooding happens further down the stream.
So how have peatlands turned from a carbon sink to a carbon source?
Well, there's lots of different reasons, but here in Yorkshire it's all to do with how we've managed the land. So look what we see here. Here's a ditch, and we call these grips, and these were dug after the Second World War when the government wanted the landowners, the farmers, to make these landscapes as productive as possible. So they needed to drain them and move the water off the land, which, as you can see, it works really well, moving the water straight off these landscapes and further down, and the movement of the water erodes the landscapes as it goes and causes these areas of bare peat and the damage that you get here.
So it's not just about the water, the carbon storage, is it?
No, it isn't. It's also about the habitat, which, if you get on your hands and knees, is just such an incredible place.
Oh wow.
So, look here, we've got a bright red sphagnum, and then we've got the cotton grasses, which are the ones in the summer with the little cotton flowers. And then we've got things like this, the bog asphodel. These are the ones that have the bright yellow flowers in the summer. And of course here we've got the heather as well, which is part of this blanket bog landscape.
Oh, cool.
So you see the sphagnum here. This is the keystone species in this habitat. This is the stuff that not only forms the peat, it likes the water,
Oh wow.
but it makes the environment acidic. So it's in control of what other plants live up here. As our main peat forming species, it's important we have this plant on our blanket bogs.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's important to remember that 70% of the UK's drinking water comes from our upland peatlands.
So without peatlands we'd have no drinking water.
Yeah, it would certainly impact our water supply. And of course this is wonderful habitat for invertebrates. So in the summer it's covered in dragonflies and they're catching all the flies and the other insects that are around.
Yeah.
And of course they're food for the birds and the other animals that use this landscape.
So I've had a great day with Beth and learnt so much about why peatlands are important for us. So for carbon storage, for water. I think what I've taken most is the water storage, how important it is that for flooding, for the wildlife, the habitats. I didn't realise that without peatlands we would have no drinking water, so they're pretty important, and I encourage you all to get involved, whether it's planting, whether it's surveying, whether it's just teaching people about peatlands and what they do.
Great. So that was the wonderful video from Beth there at Fleet Moss in Yorkshire. Beth, what an amazing visit and incredible weather for your visit as well.
Yeah, we got lucky that it didn't rain, at least while we were there. But that's pretty typical Yorkshire weather, I think, when we're up on these landscapes.
Yeah, well, I went there just last week, actually, to that same site, and I was very lucky I got sunshine. I don't know how I managed that.
That is lucky at this time of year, yeah. Usually we're in the fog.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
an
it's amazing.
day.
It's amazing to see the work that Yorkshire Wildlife Trust is doing there through the Yorkshire Peat Partnership, restoring that really important peat bog. And incredible to think what it's hopefully going to look like in 10, 15 years' time.
Yeah.
It's just going to get better and better.
It's amazing how much it's changed in just 3 years of restoration work. And we're getting species on there like otter and hen harrier and stuff that hasn't been there for such a long time, and it's only taken such a short time. So yeah, 10, 15 years, come back and see it, and I think you'll be astounded by what it looks like then.
It is absolutely incredible. And the Wildlife Trust, we're not just working to restore peatlands in the uplands, very important as that is, we're also working to restore peatlands in the lowlands, and particularly in the Somerset levels, where Somerset Wildlife Trust are doing some incredibly important work. And we're going to hear now from Steve Muse from Somerset Wildlife Trust a little bit more about that.
My name is Steve Muse and I work for Somerset Wildlife Trust. Alongside Avon Wildlife Trust, Natural England and the RSPB, we are part of a Somerset Peatland Partnership funded by the Nature for Climate Peatland Grant Scheme. Here on the Somerset levels, there is an estimated 11 million tonnes of carbon stored in our lowland peat. But that carbon and the peatlands themselves are under threat. But I'm way ahead of myself here. First, a bit of background. After the last ice age, 10,000 years ago, there was no peat in Somerset. The melting glaciers left behind wide, clay-lined valleys. Then the sea levels began to recede and stabilised around 6,500 years ago. At this point, reeds began colonising the bottom of the valleys, in time forming massive reed swamps. As the reeds died and fell into the water, they did not fully decay in the anaerobic acidic conditions. So over time, layers upon layers of dead organic matter and the carbon within it was preserved as peat. Then the reed swamps gave way to freshwater communities, with sedges and mosses dominating, and in some drier areas, trees encroached too. These habitats also contributed dead organic matter to the profile of the peat. In some parts of the Somerset levels, the peatlands reached a height at which they were mostly rain-fed, and with low nutrient inputs, bog species like sphagnum moss, sundew and cotton grass became dominant. Anaerobic acidic conditions are key to peat formation. However, as of today, we don't really have active peat-forming habitats in lowland Somerset. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the Romans began to reclaim the land of the Somerset levels and moors. Later on, the bishops and abbots, followed by drainage boards and river authorities, have all had their part to play, digging ditches, canalising rivers, and draining even the most stubborn of bogs, in order to gain land to live, work and grow food on. But draining the land in this way and creating this artificial landscape has caused peat wastage and subsidence, which in some areas has caused the ground level to sink by as much as 1 metre in the last 100 years. Today, this engineered landscape is managed by the Internal Drainage Board and the Environment Agency in an effort to minimise flood risk in wetter months and ensure water supply for agriculture in summer. This drone footage shows the agricultural nature of the area with a patchwork of fields. But if you look closely, you will see that some of these fields are edged with ditches or wet hedgerows, and the larger watercourse, the River Brew, is particularly straight. That is because the monks dug a completely new river channel. The original route was miles away, running due north from Glastonbury. A crucial point to note is that by draining peatland, the anaerobic conditions that stored the carbon safely is disrupted. As the water table drops, oxygen becomes present in the soil, aerobic conditions allow microbial respiration and the decomposition of the peat to begin. Through these processes, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases such as methane are released to the atmosphere. We estimate some 300,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent are released each year in this way in Somerset. But this drainage of the landscape isn't the only threat to the peat. Alongside Cumbria, Somerset is the last of just 2 counties in England where industrial peat mining is still taking place today. In the past, peat was dug by hand and used locally to heat people's homes. More recently, it has been dug mechanically. The process starts by stripping the vegetation from the surface of the peat. This damage can still be seen today in the stripes that are visible in this footage of West Hay Moor, in areas that were prepared but never fully mined. In the 50s and 60s, there were several changes to the peat mining industry. High-flow pumps were available to deep drain peat workings, allowing the peat to be mined right down to the underlying clay. The use of mechanical diggers or excavators became commonplace, so far greater quantities of peat could be removed than ever before. Once removed from the ground, the peat is stockpiled to dry before it is blended into compost. Given peat's properties to help soil drain freely and its low weed burden, the commercialisation of peat compost was highly lucrative. But what happens to large open peat mines? Well, typically they have been lined with clay and allowed to fill with water. Some are managed as fishing lakes for recreation, others are managed to improve their conservation value. Over the past 50 years, Somerset Wildlife Trust, Natural England and the RSPB have bought several old peat workings and managed them as a mosaic of reed beds and open water. Fantastic habitats for nesting and overwintering wildfowl and a whole host of other wildlife. But this has happened at the cost of peat, worsening climate change and reduced ecosystem services. The peat mining is licensed and some local people's livelihoods depend upon it. However, the peat that is removed was formed over thousands of years and is by no means renewable. Once dried out and removed from the ground, the carbon that was locked up is released and carries on being released when it goes into plant pots or is spread onto gardens. The peat mining licenses were issued by the County Council decades ago, before climate change was a consideration, and without the knowledge that we would be facing a climate emergency today. In 2011, the government set voluntary targets to end sales of peat-based compost for domestic use by 2020. However, peat-based products were still available to buy, so it is not perhaps a surprise that the campaign was unsuccessful. In August 2022, the government announced that the sale of bagged horticultural peat to the public will end in 2024. We are working with DEFRA to ensure this ban is comprehensive and happens as soon as possible. So what can we do to protect our peat bogs? We can buy peat-free compost, we can buy plants grown in peat-free media, we can make sure we compost at home, we can spread the word and talk about these amazing biodiverse ecosystems, their ability to combat climate change and the threats they face. So that's it for me. Goodbye from the Somerset Levels and Moors.
That was from Steve Muse at Somerset Wildlife Trust. And the Wildlife Trust were working right across the UK to try and preserve and restore peat bogs. And peat bogs are found in all four nations of the UK. In England, and we've heard already about Yorkshire and Somerset. In Wales, really important in the uplands as well. In Scotland, of course, particularly in the Flow Country and so on. But also in Northern Ireland. And Ulster Wildlife are doing some fantastic work to restore peat bogs in Northern Ireland. And in this next video, you'll hear from my colleague Simon Gray, particularly talking about the interactions there's been between peat bogs and communities over many years, and just how important these peat bogs are for local communities.
Hi guys, I'm Simon Gray. I work for Ulster Wildlife as part of the peatlands team here. And I am today out on Moneygall Bog. It's a special area of conservation out in the wilds of West Tyrone, right out in the border between the UK and the Republic of Ireland. Ulster Wildlife is actually just kind of starting off on its peatland restoration journey. So we have been working for a few years now on a whole host of peatland sites, doing everything from rhododendron control, controlling other invasive species, monitoring ammonia levels, and blocking lots and lots of drains. But here on Moneygall, we have actually already installed hundreds of peat dams using huge 13-ton diggers, which we only got stuck twice, which was an absolute nightmare. But we got it out in the end, and we got all these peat dams installed, and they are raising the water table on this bog, and they're re-wetting the whole site, which is turning it from a carbon source into a carbon sink. But one of the really amazing things that we have done on our peatland restoration sites over the past few years is that we have talked to lots and lots of people and communities that live right around the edges of the bogs. So here in Ireland, bogs are magical places. They're so intricately tied to our heritage and culture here that you can't get away from them. Everybody that lives near or right beside a bog, they will have some sort of story that ties them to it. So what I wanted to do today was tell you just a few of the stories that the local people around Moneygall have told to us over the past few years that we want to make sure are remembered and are told to other people in years to come so that they're not forgotten. The main reason why bogs are so special in Ireland and so intricately tied to everything and everyone that lives around them is because whenever you dry peat out, you cut it and dry it out, you can burn it as a fuel. And that has been done by people in Ireland for hundreds and probably thousands of years. And here on Moneygall it was no different. So people from the local villages and towns like Castlederg, they came here during the summer months and they cut turf to heat their homes. But to do that they had to drain the bog, and whenever they drained it, then they weakened it. And that had severe consequences over 100 years ago. Whenever there was a night came with a huge deluge of rain, massive thunderstorm, and all this rain fell on the bog all at once, and because it was weakened by these drains, then its structure was compromised. And as a result, it burst. Now, a bog burst is a strange phenomenon, but effectively it's like the bog is a balloon and it swells with water until it can't hold that shape anymore, and then it literally pops. And there was a great story that one of the local people told us about a blind man who was walking down the road, and he heard what he thought initially was a thunderstorm, and then after a minute he thought that it was a drove of cattle. And so he thought, oh, I better get out of the way of these animals coming down the road. And he climbed up onto the bank, and the noise rushed past him, and he thought that this was just this herd of animals, but in fact actually this massive torrent of black peaty water, millions of gallons, rushed right past him. And thankfully the blind man escaped, but there was many others that weren't so lucky. It swallowed houses and barns and livestock all around Moneygall. And that story has actually gone down so much in history that there is a song about it locally. And we actually met a fella up the road called John Gallen, whose auntie, great auntie, actually was a first-hand witness of this event. And she wrote about it in her school books, which he still has today. So one of the other great stories that we heard from a local fella here at Moneygall was actually of a man who came to the bog to cut turf more or less every day during the summer when the weather was good. And he was like the alarm clock for everybody. He was here so regularly that anybody else that came to cut turf, whenever he lifted up his tools, put them beside him and went away for his lunch, everybody else did the same. But one day came along whenever he left early, and nobody really understood why. He didn't say anything, he just got up and left well before he usually would. And everybody was bemused, they didn't know what to do with themselves. It was like they had lost all sense of time. And after a few hours the man came back and everybody was perplexed. And they asked him where on earth he had gone. And it turns out, he said, I went away to get married. And he actually came back to the bog after he got married. I don't know many brides today that would be perfectly happy if their groom left them after the ceremony and went back to the bog to cut turf. But here, bogs were so closely tied to everything that we do that was a perfectly normal thing to do. The last story from Moneygall here that I wanted to tell everybody about was of the last man that cut turf here. And he was still doing it when he was well into his 80s. And the Environment Agency here came out after the site had been designated as a special area of conservation. And they told him that he could no longer do this. They told him that there was too many species and habitats here that were so important that he couldn't cut turf anymore. And the old man put down his spade and he looked round and he looked back at these Environment Agency people and he said, "You've got to be kidding me. I'm the last thing alive on this bog." And unfortunately, in many cases, just like in Moneygall, that man's been correct. We've lost so many of the species that were so intricately tied to our culture and to the bog here. Everything from the curlew, the snipe, to even species like the large heath butterfly, which have disappeared in great numbers. And that's why we have such a job to do here. Not only to restore the bogs so that those species can come back, but so that people can continue to have a connection with something alive on these bogs going into the future.
Can I just say, that was absolutely gripping, that video. I was just, you know, we've been talking a lot about climate change and protecting our planet today, obviously, but actually just the focus on the cultural importance of our natural habitat, peatland, bogs. And actually, you know, you have an apple orchard, and I know for you, things, you know, the cultural importance, the history is so vital.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listen, thank you so much, Craig, Beth, Simon and Steve, for all those videos. I was absolutely spellbound. Thank you very much indeed. We've got some questions, and I think we have all four of you
Yes, here we are.
back. First of all, Craig, thank you so much. Beautifully presented from outside. Thank you to you and Beth.
Don't think about it. Just imagine it's just your
Hopefully
Oh, I'm not sure if you can hear us. Can you hear us? Thumbs up if you can hear us.
I mean, I think it's quite a lot.
Oh, it might be a bit of a delay on the line.
We've got
Perhaps they're a bit
we've got
quiet.
all kinds of delays. Well, let's start. We've got a question from
is that
Aston
there have
Manor
been-
School. Let me see if I can find
Well,
it.
they wanted to find
Yeah.
out a little bit about peat bogs around the world. We've talked a lot about the UK's peat bogs, but where else in the world do we find these?
Anyone?
So we have peat bogs right around sort of particularly the northern latitudes, so across particularly Canada, across northern areas of Russia, and in many sort of uplands around the world. So they're an incredibly important habitat in many places, and in Europe as well, in Scandinavia, and particularly the Baltic states. So, you do find a lot of peatlands in that band around the world in the northern latitudes. And you also have some in the tropics as well. So, particularly, in the Congo Basin and places like that, you have some peat bogs there.
And are they being actively protected as carbon sinks in other places as well?
I think right around the world there's a lot of effort to try and protect peat bogs. Sadly, it's not nearly as much as is required. Sadly, we are still seeing peatlands being degraded and dug up in many parts around the world.
Do you think, is there an education issue? Do you think people don't know enough about peat bogs? I mean, we hear a lot about oceans and ice caps, and rightly so. But do people know enough about peat bogs, do you think?
Certainly they don't. They really don't. The amount of people we take out and we show these landscapes, and it's the first time they've seen them, even if they are in their back garden. And it's such an unrecorded and unknown habitat for everyone, and yet we've seen how much these landscapes impact our climate and our environment around us. So it is really, we do need to educate people about how exciting these environments are.
I think you're doing a brilliant job, and I'm hoping your video goes viral. I
Yes.
think we were both sitting watching all your videos and going, this is brilliant, this is really, really interesting. Let me just go to...
Well, I've got one here,
Oh,
a nice
okay.
one actually from Wells Primary School.
Yeah.
I thought I might ask Steve about this. They wanted to know, how long does it take for the peatland to regenerate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We're really excited here in Somerset because this really is the first time we've restored peat on our lowlands here in the levels and moors, which is really, really great. But it takes a really long time. So it can take, a few years to re-wet and put the peat back in good condition. So we have to dig these, we're going to be doing this work called bunding work. So we dig a trench and we compact the peat back in so that it's properly secure. It means that the water's kept safe. And then once that's been done, then the water can not escape the landscape so quickly, and then peat-forming habitat starts to be created. But it takes decades and decades for that process to start, and again hundreds of years to actually build the peat up to a proper height. But what we're focusing on here in Somerset is just turning that corner and starting the process so that it's in a better state for the future.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Helen Walker, who is a science teacher, she's asking, you mentioned Russia. She wants to know, are the peat bogs in Russia completely frozen? Is that what we talk about when we talk about tundra, I suppose? Who'd like
There is a real problem. Some of them have been frozen in the past, but there's a real problem because of climate change. Some of the tundra is thawing, and increasingly you'll see that therefore the carbon that is stored in them being released into the atmosphere. So that's a real problem, that as the planet warms, actually it sort of provokes this reaction that results in even more being released, and actually that's speeding up the warming, which is a problem. It's all the more reason that really wherever peat bogs are found, because they're so important as carbon stores, so they're saying even more important than forests as carbon stores, we need to get them protected, we need to get them managed in such ways that they stay wet, or where you've got frozen landscapes, they stay frozen for the times of year that they should be frozen, so that we can absolutely protect them.
Fantastic. I've got one for you, Simon. Actually, you mentioned some of the species that have been lost due to the destruction of the habitat of the peat bogs, and you listed several different species, from butterflies to birds. I wonder whether there's any sort of active way that we can bring these species back. So is there any sort of transplantation of species between different peat bogs to try and restore the species that have been lost?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the first things that we need to do is get the conditions right for them. Mm-hmm. So we actually found out that once we had done the drain blocking and re-wetted some of our bogs. Within 1 year, we actually got snipe breeding on them again, which was amazing. That was really, really good, and it was literally a build it and they will come kind of moment. There's also lots of efforts to try and actually kickstart revegetation on areas of bare peat as well. So you can bring in seeds from different areas nearby. You can grow plants and plant them away, like we saw in Beth's video as well. And in some cases, there's even crazy ideas like throwing lime and fertilizer onto peat in order to get it to grow, which seems really insane, but actually it works really, really well. And it's just about kickstarting the growth. And I know in the north of England, actually, they did a project where they reintroduced large heath butterfly onto a peatland somewhere near Manchester. So there is efforts ongoing there to try and get these species back onto these sites. But really, the best thing we can do is get the conditions right for them in the first place, and in a lot of cases, they will come themselves.
Great. We're running out of time, so I want to ask this as a sort of final wrap-up question. It's from Class 7F, but I don't know what school it's from. Anyway, thank you for Class 7F, wherever you are. And it's really the question is, how can we help our peatlands? If you're at a school, perhaps near a peatland area, what can young people, what can teachers, what can we all do to get a little bit more involved? What organisations can we join? What's out there?
I think there's so many ways, and my colleagues might have other things to say here as well, but really the first thing is absolutely make sure no one you know is ever buying peat. Sadly, it's still being sold in some garden centres and supermarkets, and it's a real travesty. And Steve was saying earlier about how hopefully the government's going to ban the sale of it at some point, but in the meantime, just make sure anyone you know, your parents, anyone, doesn't buy it. You can buy peat-free growing media, which is really important. But also, absolutely, if you've got peat bogs near where you live, celebrate them, get involved with your local wildlife trust and other organisations. Beth, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, we're doing quite a lot of engagement in Yorkshire, and I know lots of other wildlife trusts are around the country to get to know our bogs better. So the restoration work, it requires diggers, it requires contractors, but we need to monitor these landscapes. We need to know how they're changing and how the animals are coming back and the plants are coming back. So get out there, get in contact with these organisations that are involved in these bogs and see if you can help, see if you can go in. We've got a programme called Eyes on the Bog, and it's countrywide. So go see if you can get your eyes on the bog and see what's happening there.
Hey, this is great. I live in an area which has lots of peatland, actually. I live in the Peak District. There's plenty of space out there that I could go and investigate. You've inspired me to get out there
and also
do some of this work.
If you're thinking of going to university watching this, go study geography. I think that's a good thing to study. Be like Beth and do geography.
Although I'm a physicist, so
You're
I'd say
also think
about physics. But
that kind of counts too.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate having you with us. Such expertise is incredibly valuable for our day. So thank you to all those who joined us. In fact, all of the contributors to the sessions today. As we wrap up, this is our final session on Earth.
You know what time it is now?
Lunchtime.
It's lunchtime for us and for you. But we've got STEM clubs coming up in a bit, haven't we?
Yes, so STEM clubs at the end of the day, but this afternoon, starting in 10 minutes, we have a series of chats with people working in these areas. So if you're interested in maybe getting more involved in any of the areas you've heard about today, we've got lots of people working in these areas who'd love to share with you how they got there, what their interests were, and tell you a little bit about how to get involved. So do join us for these sessions. They start at 12:35. They're all about protecting our precious planet.
Yep, and we will see you later this afternoon for fun and frolics doing we don't know what.
STEM clubs at the end of the day, yes.
We've got challenges to do, but I don't know what they are.
Someone has set us some challenges. We don't know what they are. We look forward to joining you if you have a STEM club activity happening at the end of the day. If you do, don't forget to prepare your activities. If you're stuck for an activity, you can go to the Protecting Our Planet website, protectingourplanet.org.uk. Click on the STEM Hour link and that will take you to a place that has lots of ideas for you. So if you want to get some ideas for the end of the day, do go there. We are going to get some lunch and we look forward to joining you later on today. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
See you later.